Highness, is this the beginning of a new era for the Middle East? 100 years from now, will we look back and say that's when the Middle East changed, was the year 2011?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. No doubt that what's happening in the Middle East is major, and for sure the Middle East cannot and will not be the same after the major change that's taking place right now. It's whether those countries who have witnessed the revolutions or those who did not. I think the Middle East has to change and change now.
What about Saudi Arabia? Does it have to change?
Well, I think Saudi Arabia is part of the Middle East. Saudi Arabia had some issues. You know, the problems here was we had some social grievances and some political grievances. Many of the social grievances were alleviated by the king's instructions, for example, to have minimum wage raised to a certain number, 3,000 riyals, and to have unemployment benefits, and many issues that were announced publicly. And on the political front, I believe Saudi Arabia is beginning to work on that. It's inevitable that something has to happen on that front also.
5 years ago when we met at your wonderful country estate and here, you said much the same thing, that Saudi Arabia has to change. There have to be reforms. But the reforms have been what we call in our country glacial. They come very slowly. Are they going to have to come much faster?
I acknowledge the fact that Saudi Arabia's reforms have been moving a bit slower than what I want and expect. But I think with what's happening right now in our region, it's inevitable that the reforms on the political front, structural reforms, have to be enacted sooner than later.
His Majesty King Abdullah has spent a lot of money in the last month or so, $36 billion, for as you indicated. Are you going to have to, in Saudi Arabia, open up the process so people can determine their own future?
You know, 11th of March was a very tense day in Saudi Arabia, where the so-called demonstration was supposed to take place. And clearly, those demonstrations never materialized. You know, in spite of some 100 or 200 people that demonstrated in the East Province. But really, this was a referendum to the regime of King Abdullah and to Al Saud. And I think we have passed it successfully. Having said that, I will reiterate what I said in my op-ed. Saudi Arabia and no other government in the region should take for granted its people. I believe the fact that the referendum has passed very successfully, Saudi Arabia should reiterate its position to reform past, and give the people more voice in the running of the government. For example, have the Majlis Shura be elected, or at least half of them.
And a greater role for women in Saudi Arabia?
The UNDP report that was established and published almost a decade ago established the fact that there are three major deficiencies in the Arab world. Women empowerment is one of them. And number two is the freedom of speech. And number three is education. So these are paramount and very important. No society can advance if 50% of its population is locked up in the living room or just cooking in the kitchen. So I think these three aspects have to go together. And the Arab world right now is forced to face these realities sooner than later.
Wouldn't it be easy for the king to say, we should allow women to drive as a first step, to give them that kind of physical freedom?
I support that view. If you allow ladies to drive, this will make at least 500,000 to 1 million expatriates leave the country, which will really lessen the pressure on the infrastructure and on the system of Saudi Arabia. So yes, I'm for that, and I believe that sooner or later this thing will be discussed publicly, and I hope that will be some law will be enacted whereby ladies could drive their cars eventually.
In the West, in America and in Europe, women are now such a critical component of our economic and political strength. More than half of the workers in America now are women. 8 out of every 10 employees now in the European Union that are being hired new are women. Doesn't Saudi Arabia deny itself some strengths by keeping women at a kind of second-class status?
If you can witness what's happening lately in the last 2 or 3 years, ladies have been incorporated more in the system and the society. And I'm very honored and glad to really be at the vanguard of that. We would like to have our company, Kingdom Holding, be a role model to many people to come and see how ladies interact and help the advancement of our company and eventually the society in Saudi Arabia.
Why is there such a division in this part of the world between the Shiite and the Sunnis? You have a Shiite minority in this country, but next door in Bahrain, 60 to 70% of the population is Shiite, but they have no real voice.
Well, I've been to Bahrain just last month to meet to the king and interact with the people there. And I'll give you first-hand reaction about what I've seen there, frankly speaking. The bulk of the population really is around 55% are Shiite. But the Sunnis are very much backing the king. And the only small minority from the Shiite are really anti-establishment over there. And unfortunately, this whole fuss is happening because of the small minority. I think there's no way out but to heed and accept the call of the Crown Prince to sit on the negotiations table and to have open dialogue between the ruling family, Al Khalifa, the king and the Crown Prince, and the opposition headed by some Shiite groups. I say some, I emphasize that, because not all of them are against the establishment, and to find a way where they can go forward together in Bahrain.
There have been reports that His Majesty believes that Iran stirred up the trouble in Bahrain because it has Shia interests there. But we see no direct link between Iran and what happened in Bahrain.
Sorry, let me differ with you on that. I met the king personally, and I'll quote him. And I'll quote what I've seen there. There's a direct link between what's happening in Bahrain with a certain small segment of the Shiite population and Iran. It's very explicit. And they even provide them with training. And also, I will reiterate what the king said publicly, is that some of these people have been trained in Lebanon by Hezbollah also. Now, I'm going a bit extreme, but that's the impression that you have over there, and that's very dangerous, serious. So Hezbollah and Iran, not only fiddling around in Bahrain, they have hands in Kuwait, in Iraq, even with Hamas, Sunni Hamas in the West Bank. And remember also, they went all the way to Morocco, Nigeria, and many other countries, African countries right now, are worried from the infiltration of the Iranian Shiite regime there. So Iran is not playing a stabilizing role at all in our region, let alone Africa and the whole world.
Do you think that Iran will emerge as a much stronger player in this part of the world as a result of the turmoil throughout the Middle East?
Well, I have to remind you that Iran has its own problems. Remember when the last elections took place, almost half the population went to the street, but they were repressed very aggressively. So for Iran to come and say to Bahrain, you are repressing the Shiite uprising over there, this is the ultimate hypocrisy. They have to see what's happening in Iran before they talk about what's happening in Bahrain and neighboring countries.
Do you approve of what the West is doing in Libya with NATO providing airstrikes on behalf of the Libyan rebels?
I'm glad you asked this question. I think what's happening in Libya is a big shameful act. The U.S. has no policy, no strategy, no objective, no mission statement. You've seen how this thing was hastily done and how the competition was between France and Britain, who will beat first and who will bomb first the Gaddafi troops. And the friction between the U.S. administration people. You see, for example, Gates, the Secretary of Defense, one day saying, our objective is not to unseat Gaddafi. Yet several days later, Clinton comes and says, Secretary of State comes and say, it's one of the objectives to have him leave. So this friction internally does not help at all. Just today, the NATO Secretary General came publicly and said this war cannot be won by force. So we need a peaceful solution. More importantly, these three ex-Secretaries of States, Powell, Albright, and Baker, publicly came and said, don't impose democracy by force.
But how else are you going to move Gaddafi, or do you think that he should stay in place?
Well, I think at the end of the day, each country has to decide for itself. The people in Tunis, they've decided by themselves who should not be there. They have not decided who should be there, which is very dangerous. In Egypt, the same thing, decided who is not to be there, but they have not decided who will be there to replace Mubarak. So this is an ongoing process. We're not there yet. So the issue of having democracy come to our region very fast is not really that easy. I remember one of your major partners in the world, Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, was having lunch with me just a year ago. And I asked him, what kind of democracy you have in Singapore? He said, Prince, we have our own democracy, and not the US democracy, and not the European democracy. So you can't just transplant Western type democracy in our region. It's not going to happen like in our lifetime and that easily.
We continue to hear in the United States that His Majesty and other prominent Saudis are very unhappy with the Obama administration because of the manner in which it handled President Mubarak of Egypt, who had been a friend of the United States for a long time, even though he did run a politically oppressive regime.
Let me verify this a little bit because I'm close to the ruling family in Saudi Arabia and King Abdullah. King Abdullah has a lot of respect to President Obama. And I think this has been blown out of proportion. Actually, Mr. Gates was here just on Wednesday, and he met the king privately for 90 minutes. And I will sum it up by what he said after the meeting. He said we had an excellent meeting, very cordial meeting, that really enhanced our relationship further.
I talked to someone in this part of the world who's very close to the kingdom, and when I raised that, he went, the Saudis are really unhappy with the United States.
I don't buy that. And look, I interact with the king. I hear what the king says privately. I can assure you this is not correct, my friend Tom.
But His Majesty also sent emissaries to Beijing and to Moscow right after that and said, we're open to doing more business with you.
No, but that was for other purpose. That was, really that was very much to get them on our side, what's happening in Bahrain. Because remember, we are lobbying the Chinese, the Russians, and the Europeans and even the Turkish people, and the Turkish Prime Minister to get Bahrain, to get the Bahrain situation under control. So, as you know, Turkey, China, Russia, they all have good say with Iran. They have good relation with them. So really, the relationship between Russia, China, and Arab world is good. And we'd like to capitalize on that to get this thing under control in Bahrain by having them get Iran under control.
In terms of worldwide oil production, Libya is not that much of a major player anymore. So why is oil $100 a barrel, and people are projecting it may go as high as $140 a barrel?
That's a good question. Libya produces 1.6 million barrels, and I think right now this all disappeared from the market. And Saudi Arabia went public by saying that we will cover all the missing oil from Libya. And I think we have covered all that ourselves and some other OPEC countries. It's very much psychological.
As an investor, as a Saudi, what do you project for the price of oil come summertime when Americans are traveling a lot more and dependent on oil?
See, the stated objective of Saudi Arabia, and the majority, I don't say all, the majority of OPEC countries, is to have the oil somewhere between 70 and 80. We will do our best to sustain it. Can you imagine what would have happened to the price of oil if Saudi Arabia led the OPEC countries and raised its production, whereby was put a lid on the increase of price of oil? This would have been 150, 160 today. But Saudi Arabia is playing a big role in stabilizing price of oil in the neighborhood of 100, 110, with the hope that when things subside in our region, it will go back to the neighborhood of $70 to $80, which is our medium to long-term objective in Saudi Arabia and with the majority of OPEC countries.
Will it be impossible in the future for any kind of a regime to control its people as long as the technology can tie them together and make them, in some ways, greater than the sum of their parts?
No doubt technology played a big role in facilitating, enhancing, and making quicker the message to be sent to disseminated to the bulk of the population. But it's not the only role, because in Libya, really, let alone Twitter and Facebook, the communications there is very difficult in the country. But there's no doubt it's an enhancing process that really played a big role in the fall down of two leaders in the Arab world, in Tunis and Egypt.
Will there be a significant difference between the younger generation coming up and your generation? You're one of the young whiz kids of Saudi Arabia, but there are a lot of young people coming up who are looking for their own opportunities, not seeing them as easily as they might have 20 years ago.
Well, I think the message we've been getting lately from the young people in the Arab world is that they would like to have a say in the running of their affairs and their government. And the least we can do in our countries is to listen to them and to begin giving them the right to participate in the decision-making process of their nations. That's the least we can do.
You have a big investment in Syria, a big hotel there. Syria is a country where blood is running in the streets. Is that not going to have a big effect on your hopes for the Four Seasons Hotel in Syria?
No, really, I would take the high road and say not only Syria. We have a lot of investments in the Middle East in general. And with the confusion, chaos that's happening in our region, all our investments are really impacted. But really, that's the least of my concern today. Today, we want stability in all our region, and I hope that this will come sooner than later. And obviously, later on our investments, we will be talking about it.
You spend a lot of time in the United States. When you're in the United States looking back at this region, what worries you most?
Well, my worries are the same, whether I'm in the United States or here, frankly speaking. I like my region to be stable. I like my region to advance, because we have a lot of, as I said in my op-ed in New York Times, we have a lot of resources here. Human resources, we have natural resources, not only oil. Really, our region, we can find a renaissance economically, financially. This will be very helpful to us. And I think what's happening right now in our region is a wake-up call to all those countries even those who really did not witness any turbulence, like Saudi Arabia as an example. I can really say that Saudi Arabia has successfully passed that exam. But I think we should not take our people for granted. We should make change and change fast and adapt and adopt all those reforms on the political front as much as we adopted them on the social economical front.
Ines, thank you very much.